A Blurring Line, Chapter 1, The Tears of Uther Pendragon, Part 1. Could Merlin really be blamed for wishing they'd never found Morgana? She should have known it would not go well, especially for her, if not specifically. On the ride back to Camelot, she half expected Morgana to pipe up at any moment. Merlin poisoned me. 3 words that would end with Merlin swinging from a noose. At least it wouldn't be the pyre. But they never came. In fact, when Gaius dragged Merlin along to check Morgana for injury, Morgana called her back into the room alone. "I cannot begin to apologize for everything I've done," Morgana had said, and Merlin had been stupid, or hopeful enough, to believe her. Then Uther had begun to go rather publicly mad. It was timing too perfect to be coincidence. Finding the root thing had been happenstance for Merlin, but Morgana had to have known it was there. She'd taken it. So Merlin crept out after her, following her as quietly as she could through the woods to some clandestine meeting. One that turned out to be with Morgause. But Morgana had grown more clever over her year in supposed captivity, and had known Merlin was there the whole time. Sitting in chains in the forest, she could not help but wonder what Morgause had in store. Likely something slow and painful, if her threats about regretting poisoning Morgana were any indication. There was an army marching towards Camelot. Morgana was working for the enemy, and Merlin could not escape the chains that bound her. She could not understand why. They weren't cold iron. They looked more like silver, but every time she tried to escape, magically or physically, they tightened. Then the creatures came. She did not know what they were, but that hardly mattered. They were insectile, with large black pincers and stingers curling from behind them, hanging above their heads. Magic did not seem to deter them. Not for long, anyway. Shouting spells, Merlin gasped as white-hot pain struck her near her shoulder. Pain blew through her like a hurricane, and magic went with it, sending the insects flying and ripping words from her throat. Words she had only heard her father use, deep, resounding words she'd never expected to speak herself. They were a far cry from Balinor's echoing voice, but she could only hope that someone, anyone, heard her, as another wave of pain radiated out from the wound. It was a familiar burning sort of pain, one that had once had her clawing at her own throat, desperate to breathe. Whatever these things were, they were venomous. Morgause had her poisoned, intended to have her ripped apart and eaten by these things as well, most likely. Merlin's vision blurred with pain and venom. She fell to the side, crying out as the chains tightened and her wound throbbed. The skittering was back. She was going to die. Then fire bloomed, and Merlin felt the cool touch of the dragon's scales wrapping around her as she finally blacked out. Leon was on guard duty, which was good, because if he hadn't been, no one would have seen her slipping through the shadows. Over the last 5 months or so, Leon had grown more observant, looking for what he would never have expected before. That seemed to come with the territory of learning one of his closest friends had been hiding magic from everyone. Said friend was stumbling from shadow to shadow. Leon ran forward and caught her. He nearly recoiled as he did. Her skin was clammy, burning hot, and she winced at his touch. There was a familiar sheen in her eyes, one that spoke of either illness or something more sinister. "Merlin, what?" he began. She shook her head. "Need Gaius," she demanded. Leon couldn't argue there. Wrapping an arm around her, he nodded to his guard partner. "Sound the warning bell?" he called. "No," Merlin practically snarled. "Can't know I got away. Not till after," she said by way of explanation, already trying to walk away, only Leon's arm keeping her mostly still. Leon glanced at her and nodded to his watch partner. "I'll take care of this. Finish your patrol," he commanded, and the guard nodded, not about to question the first night. Leon, though, was questioning everything, as he practically dragged Merlin into the castle and straight to Gaius. He expected Merlin to wake the physician to help her, not demand he follow her. Just as confused as Gaius, given Merlin's nearly 2 days' worth of absence and current state, Leon followed them up to the king's chambers. They looked like they'd been ransacked, and Uther was curled in a corner whimpering. Something about the sight seemed to set something off in Merlin. She pulled away from Leon, on whom she'd been leaning. He was growing more and more concerned about the half-dried stain on her right shoulder. Lunging for the bed, Merlin vanished behind it, reappearing in a moment with a twisted root that looked almost human in shape. She stepped across the room and hurled the root into the still-burning fireplace, which roared upward. Merlin and Gaius both slapped hands over their ears, though Leon didn't hear anything. Uther let out a breath, a sob racking his form as his eyes cleared of terror, confusion replacing it. Gaius assured him that it was just an enchantment. He would recover. Leon turned to ask Merlin how she had known that was there at all, only to watch as her eyes slid closed and she began to crumple to the floor. He lunged forward and just caught her before she could hit the floor. Gaius swore, "Take her back to my chambers now. I will be right behind you," he demanded, and Leon scooped Merlin up, taking off for the physician's chambers. No one stopped him, a perk of being first knight. He laid her down on her back, and even unconscious as she was, she cried out in pain. Leon quickly turned her over. In the moonlight of the wide window of her bedroom, he saw that the half-dried substance on her shoulder was blood. He was quick to pull off her jacket. She'd foregone her cloak. Her shirt, once white, was stained near black with blood. The injury would have been nothing serious if he couldn't see the black veins peeking out of the collar of her shirt. "What the hell have you been doing, Merlin?" Leon wondered aloud, only falling silent as the door opened and Gaius rushed in, shooing Leon out of the room. He debated for a moment what to do. Arthur needed to know some of what happened. But if something magical was happening here, as he suspected it was, then he needed a story that would match Merlin's. So, instead of following the ingrained instinct to report to the prince, who was currently regent in all but name, Leon sat down and waited. Gaius looked surprised to see him. "Sir Leon, what are we telling everyone?" he asked, cutting to the chase. Gaius raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" he asked. Leon sighed. There was no getting around it. "I saw the wound, Gaius. I know the only way she could survive that. And I know that it's possible for her. What are we telling everyone else?" Leon said. Gaius's eyes widened. "It seems we have much to discuss before my niece wakes up, Sir Leon." Gaius's tone had grown cold. "Do you intend to turn her in?" "If I did, I would have done so 5 months ago when I figured her out. She is safe with me, as are her secrets. Arthur is going to panic when he wakes to find his father's madness was an enchantment, and the missing love of his life is now on the brink of death. What are we going to tell him?" Leon asked, trying to keep his cool. Gaius nodded. Good. Let's get our story straight," the old physician said.